Welcome to Q&A, a program that raises questions and provides answers to issues important to the community. Today's topic is roadblocks, also known as sobriety checkpoints, stops intended to deter drunk driving. Our host is Kendra Cooper, a Massachusetts attorney and educator. Please join us for this discussion of roadblocks, Episode 5 of Q&A. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Attorney Kendra Cooper, your host for today's segment. And our discussion today is going to be about roadblocks, and otherwise known to some people as sobriety checkpoints. Especially for those of you who have never encountered a roadblock, we hope to help you understand a little better about what you could expect. What they are, what their purpose is, and some of the problems that are associated with roadblocks. My guests today are two experienced criminal attorneys, Attorney James Milligan on my right and Attorney Mark Stevens on my left. James is a former prosecutor who focuses his practice primarily on cases that involve intoxication. He practices in Massachusetts. And Attorney Mark Stevens practices in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And he's a criminal defense lawyer out of Salem, New Hampshire, and he too focuses on DWI cases. Welcome to today's discussion.
Thanks, Kendra.
I appreciate your taking the time to come here and help enlighten us a little on exactly what roadblocks are involved and some of the issues that are really the questions that have been raised about them. So, what is a roadblock? I mean, I've never been stopped by one, so I don't know. But I mean, would you like to start? Or
sure. I mean, a roadblock, I guess, is conducted by local law enforcement, mostly by the state police here in Massachusetts, and their goal is to deter drunk drivers, deter impaired driving. The theory is that they find certain particular areas of the state where there's been a high incidence of either OUI arrests or accidents related to OUIs, and they put a roadblock there where they encounter the public. That's essentially the purpose behind them. I'm sure it's the same in New Hampshire.
It basically is. They block a road, they stop everybody who approaches, anybody who's unfortunate to be on the road at that time, unfortunate enough to be on the road at that time, gets stopped, questioned, required to produce their identity, and generally hassled, in my viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. But like a roadblock, I'm picturing like complete stop. Is it just in one direction or both directions, or how?
It depends. They do them both ways. Some of them stop everybody on a given road. Some of them stop them in one direction. But generally, they want to catch everybody on that road. They want to stop anybody they can. So it's generally going to be a sort of a choke point type of technique where they just basically block a road and stop everybody who pulls up.
Any particular time of day, or I mean, what?
The state police in Massachusetts will always run them at night. Generally, they'll have, there's a couple of different phases to these. Generally, they'll have what's called saturation patrols, and those are usually from about 8 to 11, 3 hours. They'll have troopers out in the road enforcing seatbelt violations, that type of activity. And then they'll start the actual roadblock, usually from the hours of 11 to 3 a.m. And they have to stay, pursuant to their own guidelines. They have to abide by those timelines. So it's not a all-night affair, but it's a good chunk of hours within the night.
Yeah. Now, are there maybe?
It is for the people arrested.
Well, yeah. All right. That's right. It'll be a bad evening for sure. How many police are usually involved in this? Or when you're coming along on the road, especially, is it usually a country road, or is it like Route 93 or 128? Or I mean, how large a road do they usually stop people on?
They don't do them on 93 yet. I think that's probably going to be coming, but they're usually on a state highway or a two-lane road, someplace that's going to be busy. They want a lot of traffic and they want to stop a lot of cars. But they haven't been able to stop, an entire interstate yet.
So like something like Route 28 coming down
Sure.
from New Hampshire, or something.
Yep, they actually used to do them on 28 in Salem.
One of the critical components to them is they have to minimize the inconvenience to the public. So, you can imagine what it would be shutting down 93, either in Massachusetts or in New Hampshire or the Turnpike. That would not be minimizing inconvenience to the public. That would create one heck of a traffic jam, and you'd be there for hours. And that's really not they're not supposed to do that. They have to minimize inconvenience to the public.
Well, sometimes even with radar units that are set up, it's amazing to see how the highway will just like slow to a crawl,
Sure.
and you know, people will completely slow down and it'll back up. So I can imagine with a roadblock. But you're saying that it's mostly around 11 o'clock at night?
At least the state police that are run in Massachusetts, they always start at 11 and go to 3. That's kind of their set hours that they run the actual roadblock. And the saturation initiative, like from 8 to 11, like I said, they're enforcing anything. Could be operating influence cases, seatbelt violations. They're out on the road as kind of more patrol of the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, when I know that I've never encountered them, as I said. Now, would you have maybe 10, 15 cars ahead of you come around a curve and suddenly you're stopped? Or how do you even know that that's what's there and it's not an accident ahead or something?
There's usually some signage, like Department of Public Works type signage that says sobriety checkpoint, DWI sobriety checkpoint ahead. But by the time you see that, it's too late. You're rolling into the roadblock and about to be stopped.
So it wouldn't be half mile back up or anything like that?
Oh, it could be.
It could be?
Oh, sure, it could be.
Oh, really?
Sure.
Well, they're not supposed to get that backed up. You know, there's, at least according to the Massachusetts guidelines, there's a safety officer who's positioned at a certain point before the checkpoint. If the traffic backs up to that particular trooper, wherever he is in the scheme, they're supposed to let some traffic through. I'm not, you know, I've had a number of clients say, I don't know where that screening officer was or where he was, but I was waiting for a half hour. And a lot of times they position him, you can't see what's ahead of you. You just think you're sitting in traffic or there's some accident. Mm-hmm. And like Mark said, before you realize what you're in, it's too late to get out. And they're designed that way. They don't want people to be turning around. That defeats the purpose of the initiative. So, like Mark said, it's a funneling effect, and once you're in, you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering, as far as just thinking of someone who generally doesn't drink, I mean, how would I know, as I'm going towards this roadblock, I'm driving along, maybe coming back from my son's house in New Hampshire or something, and then suddenly everybody stopped. I mean, what can I expect? I mean, as a person who hasn't had any alcohol, no wine at night, I mean, to me, I would be kind of, I would be really kind of concerned.
If your car is selected, if they're stopping every car, sometimes they'll use a random selection, like every third car, every fourth car, something like that. But if they're stopping every car, you're still going to have to stop. You're going to have to identify yourself, give the officer your license and registration, and sometimes even answer some questions about drinking or where you're coming from or other intrusions. So despite the fact that you're obeying the law, you haven't anything to drink, you're still going to get stopped.
Okay, and sometimes they don't stop every car, though.
No, sometimes they don't. Like Jay said, if they back up.
I mean, is that what your experience?
Yeah, I mean, the state police their directives are to stop every vehicle. I mean, that's every one that I've seen. Now, they may have had some others that I haven't seen, and maybe it's every third vehicle, but generally it's every single vehicle here, as long as, like I said, as long as traffic is not getting backed up, but as long as the things are going smoothly, they're going to stop every vehicle. And the state police here, they have written guidelines that they're supposed to follow. So they're supposed to provide a canned greeting. Now, the interaction between a trooper and a motorist should last no longer than 30 seconds.
Oh, really? Only 30? Okay, 30 seconds.
A canned greeting. Good evening, ma'am. This is a state police sobriety checkpoint. We're checking the sobriety of all operators. During that encounter, they're supposed to look for certain clues. If they see clues that would lead them to believe that you're impaired by alcohol, they'll send you for further screening. But every vehicle will get stopped, and every vehicle will get that greeting. Oftentimes, at least clients seem to indicate that they don't even go there. They say, have you been drinking? They're really not supposed to do that.
So there's really a script almost that they should be following.
It's written right in their guidelines. It's a canned greeting that they're supposed to use, but trying to monitor that is, it's up to the individual troopers to do what they're supposed to do. But like I said, I've had numerous clients say they just come up and ask me if I was drinking.
I would wonder too if they are getting backed up, like you're describing, that maybe they might just skip some of the formalities, and just
get to the chase.
And just, yeah, right. Maybe that's part of it, but they really aren't supposed to do that.
They're not supposed to
imply that you're drunk.
Right.
You're not supposed to do that. So if they do come along and maybe I haven't been drinking, but they would then look into the car, or I mean, what if I've got several other occupants in the car? What does a sobriety checkpoint mean for them? I mean, I'd be the driver, but they.
Well, this is a problem too. If the cop is talking with you and smells alcohol, he's going to presume that it's coming from you. It could be coming from the person seated next to you. you might be subjected to field sobriety testing or breath testing out at the roadside just because of what your passengers smell like.
Well, considering the campaign
Most
for a
people think-
designated driver, that's a little disturbing because it could be what he's smelling initially
Sure.
that he's observing is not you. Now, if I were to say, look, I haven't had anything to drink, it's not
Smart
me.
people say.
Well, yeah. Well, smart people probably shouldn't say anything, but
Right.
I'd say, but he could still, even though I hadn't had anything to drink, could still
Oh, sure.
have me come out.
It could be something just as innocuous as having red glassy eyes. I mean, you may be somebody who has red eyes or glassy eyes. It's 11 o'clock or 3 a.m.
Or someone with a thyroid problem, that
You know,
their
there's
eyes
all
will
kinds
bulge.
of reasons,
you know,
but you know,
sometimes.
it's ingrained in them that if someone has red, glassy, bloodshot eyes or some variation of that observation, it's because of alcohol, and that's just not the case. So they could observe that and that alone, and say, well, I think I have enough here to send you to a screening area for further field sobriety tests.
This must be an area that has a large area, like a parking lot near it or something. I mean, I'm just saying, some of the country roads aren't all that.
Sure, they like to use parking lots, at least the ones in New Hampshire. The parking lots have built-in stripes that, that they use to park
Oh,
their cars,
yeah, the
so
line.
they need the line to walk on. There's usually cones set up, and they'll have 4 or 5 screening areas working at a time, and officers running people through field sobriety testing and portable breath testing and so forth.
Generally with the state police, they have a list of things they're looking for. They're looking for odor, eyes, problems with speech, anything unusual, or open containers, alcohol in the vehicle, and then they have a catch-all, other, which they can really put anything. Usually it's admissions or they see something else, but usually when they go through and write all their paperwork up, it's going to be one of those 5 categories which get you sent to the pit area, which we haven't really discussed yet, but that's generally how it works.
And is it they're more likely that if you're by yourself versus another person, that you're more likely to be hassled? Or, I mean,
No, I think everyone's
you think pretty much
got an equal
everybody's
shot at getting hassled.
okay. All right. Well, I was just thinking if there's no one else with you, there's more likelihood that you'd be diverted to the pit area or not. Well, let's talk about what the pit area is, because once an officer has determined that he thinks that there's some sort of suspicion of illegal activity, what happens then?
Well, the pit area, once you go in, very few come out.
What's the
it's-
pit? Is that
pit
an
is,
acronym, or is that just a name,
that's what
a
the
pet name?
That's what the state police call it, the pit area. It's called a screening area. So
Okay.
basically, you get to the screening officer. He or she determines that there's reasonable suspicion, one of those legal terms, that someone's impaired by alcohol. They'll send them to the pit area. The pit area is a well-lit. You'll see the bright, lamps that you see on the highway when they're doing construction. It's
Yes,
a well-lit
construction.
area. You're going to find a bunch of troopers in there, and their goal is to administer field sobriety tests. Field
When
sobriety
you say a
tests.
bunch of troopers, I mean, how many are we talking? Are we
Well-
talking 6? Or are we talking, or does it depend on the holiday? Or
Depends on the holiday, the size of
Okay.
the grant they've got, the size of the area that they're blocking. They have some enormous ones down here. And
They need to be able to staff it. So if you got, let's say, Quincy Shore Drive, Caddy Park in Quincy is a real popular area. They shut down both lanes. I mean, that's a high traffic area.
so coming and going is.
You can imagine if they get 5, 6 people that they want to send in, they got to have the manpower to accommodate those field sobriety tests. Because what they don't want is someone sitting in a running motor vehicle who they believe is under the influence of alcohol. They want to get them to an assigned trooper and get these field sobriety tests done. So it's a bit of a, I call it a machine. I mean, they want to get them in, get them through field sobriety tests. If they're going to be placed under arrest, get them in the place under arrest. And then that trooper's off with that person. So they need somebody to fill it. So you're generally going to have 6 to 10 troopers working these pit areas. Some of them are active. Some of them are not doing anything, just hanging out, I guess. So that, in the field tests, generally 3 tests will be given. They're pursuant to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the horizontal gaze, the nystagmus, which is not admissible in Massachusetts, walk and turn, and a 1-legged stand. So pretty much balance and coordination tests. And if you didn't bring your A game, you're going in. You're going to be placed under arrest.
When you just kind of quickly went through those field sobriety tests, but I think a lot of the public really doesn't understand what that is. And could you kind of slow down a little bit, and particularly the eye test with a.
I'm going to let Mark talk about that one.
Okay,
since we don't use it here, so I'll defer to Mark on
Okay,
the
all right,
horizontal
that
gaze.
one.
the eye
nystagmus
test is not admissible down here, but it's admitted in trials in New Hampshire. And what they do is the officer will ask you to watch the tip of the pen and follow the tip of the pen through a series of wavings. And the officer is looking to see if your pupils twitch, basically, if they bounce. And He'll run this about 14 times, and you watch the pen, and at the end of it, he concludes that you're drunk. It's sort of like a magic wand. The person who's submitted to this test usually thinks I passed it because he or she told me to keep my head still and follow the pen and reach out and touch it, whatever else he or she had him do. And so they think that they passed this test, and they don't really understand why it progresses beyond that, but they're going to fail it. So
It's simple to do that.
this was a test that was designed to be done in an eye doctor's office, with your chin in one of those little, little
steady.
straps, not out at the roadside while you're supposedly weaving and swaying and
Or in a
scared with all
boat.
the lights
Yeah.
going on, or in a boat, right?
Right.
But that's what that test is all about.
Okay.
And then from there, once they fail that test, they'll move on to what's called the 9-step walk and turn, a balance and coordination test. So they'll be instructed, like Mark said, they usually will have a line there. Put your left foot on the line, right foot heel to toe on that, arms by your side, and listen to the instructions until you're told to start. Now, keeping in mind your environment that you're in at this point.
Right,
You're
all
probably
the
shaking,
lights.
you're probably nervous, not a great situation. The trooper will demonstrate the test. So heel toe, 9 steps out, arms by your side at all times. You cannot raise your arms at all. There's some variation in that, but sometimes the troopers don't know that. Turn in a prescribed manner. It's a very awkward turn. Keep your left foot on the line in small pivots, 3 or 4, in reverse direction. It's the most awkward way to turn around there is.
Do they demonstrate this at all for you?
They'll demonstrate a couple steps. They might then demonstrate the turn. You got to keep in mind that time is of the essence. They want to get through these field sobriety tests because other vehicles are coming in. So I don't know that they're going to demonstrate the entire test, but they will demonstrate portions of it, and they're required to according to their manual.
I'm having trouble picturing these steps. I mean, I'm just trying to envision
and come back
how
the
you
same
do
way.
it. Right.
So you're there standing on a line for 30 seconds or a minute listening to this, knowing that, if I don't pass this, I'm nervous, I'm shaking. If I don't pass this, this isn't good. I mean, this isn't like doing it in your living room. I mean, this is your freedom
But how many
on the
people
line
do it
here.
in their living room anyway?
Right,
I mean,
and it's-
how many have
that's-
ever done it before?
That's the other thing that Mark and I talked about. You're asking people to do unusual tasks to measure normal behavior. When's the last time you saw somebody walking heel to toe or even standing on one leg for 30 seconds? You just don't do it. And it's slightly unfair to ask them to do it perhaps for the first time in this environment. And it's not really one conducive to passing them, that's for sure. So that's a 9-step walk and turn. It's also interesting to note that as a test, you can correctly classify only 68% of the suspects you give the test to
Classify as being inebriated?
as being impaired. So are you the 68 or the 32? And that's the issue. As a test, it gets a D. D+.
Now, are there any other tests that they do at this field sobriety test besides the walk and turn and the?
Again, at least in Massachusetts, the last one they're going to give you is the one-legged stand test. This one, as a test, only gets 65%. But
Accuracy.
this one's probably, in my assessment, the most difficult test there is. They want you to stand, arms by your side, hold a leg of your choosing out, off the ground for 6 inches, toe pointed up, looking at your toe with your arms by your side, and count 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, all the way up to 30 1,000. It's a 30-second test. They're supposed to time it. Usually they never do. It's just a very difficult test to do. And if you put your foot down, you're done. It's over.
Those are the primary ones. Do they also do, I've heard either alphabet tests or
Counting
they
backwards.
also do that,
Sure.
counting backwards, alphabet?
We see them a lot more on regular stops. Generally, when they go through these sobriety checkpoints, they're told what field sobriety tests to give.
So they don't have to do all of the ones
They don't have to
that-
do
that,
all of
you know,
them.
that
They're
we're used to,
usually
like-
instructed pursuant to the manual, give the HDN, give the one-legged stand, give the walk and turn.
And HDN was what?
It's the
That's
magic
That's
pen.
yeah, I was just wondering what that, is that astigmatic or what's the name for that test?
It stands for horizontal gaze nystagmus. I
that's
say
what I
it
was
stands for
wondering.
here goes nothing, but that's what.
No,
that's
you've
what-
got your own definition.
Yeah, that's what the test is all about. It's following a pen. And there are the other tests that I think you might be thinking of are done when a person gets out of the car and they've got an obvious physical handicap or something, and they can't stand on one leg. They're on crutches or whatever, and then they'll do the alphabet and they'll run through some kind of mental gymnastic tricks with them, like counting backwards, starting at an odd number and ending at an even
So that's
number.
not standard though for a
No,
roadblock?
no, they want to do the same ones because it's easier for the cops to testify in court if they say the same things all the time. So if he's used to the pen waving, the walking the line, and the one-leg stand, and kind of gets the pattern down of what the things that he needs to add up to a failure are, then that's a lot easier for them to testify about in court and to report and so forth.
And would there be any reason for passengers to come out at a roadblock?
No, well, no legal reason for them
No.
to, unless they're smoking a joint when when they drive through it or holding a gun or something. But there's no real reason to question them. In some roadblocks, they are questioned, though. They'll ask for all their identifications and stuff. And
I think that's kind of concerning these days now after a recent passenger ultimately died after there being a roadblock, I think it was in North Andover. A lot of the details aren't out right now, but I mean, I hadn't really thought about the problems for a passenger when it's a sobriety test, which you would think would be primarily for the operator. But I mean, now I'm thinking from the perspective of what about the passengers?
Well, it shouldn't be about the passengers. I mean, the goal, if you look at their initiatives, the goal is to deter drunk driving. Drunk drivers are usually behind the wheel. Again, I'm not all that familiar with the facts that happened in North Andover, but I don't know how they get to a passenger and get that person out of the vehicle. Something must have happened there, or perceived to have happened, to get him outside of the vehicle. But this shouldn't be about passengers. It really never should be, because that defeats the purpose of the sobriety checkpoint. Now, like Mark said, if there's something obvious, they have alcohol in their hand, well, that's a crime, and that should be pursued further. But short of something obvious, during that 30-second, 1-minute encounter, how much can you observe of the passengers when you're supposed to be looking at the driver?
What if they didn't have a seatbelt on when they pulled up? Well, actually, how would they know? They'd be stopped at that point. I mean, I'm thinking, or if it's a child, or it's in different states, there are different child safety laws. Once they're stopped, they would be looking for a wide range of possible infractions.
They tell them, look for any motor vehicle violations that you see and record and obviously stop. And the person's driving without a license, they're supposed to stop them and all that. But, the person could be taking the seatbelt off to get their identification too as they roll into the roadblock. You obviously, you've got to produce this thing. So they're not supposed to be looking for stuff like that. Like Jay said, they're not supposed to be interrogating the passengers, but we know that in some cases they do.
Now, when they're stopped, too, say, over by the pit, maybe, at this point, do they give Miranda warnings, or only when they're going to be arrested, or after or before they start to do the field sobriety tests? Or
they don't.
I mean, is there anything there?
No. I mean, well, I think that Miranda warnings should be given. The two triggering events for Miranda warnings are first, custody. While someone certainly at a pit area screening is not free to leave, they're not in custody at that point, so there's really no Miranda application. I think that somebody should be informed that they do have the right to remain silent, but Miranda warnings are not applicable. The case law in Mass is very clear, not applicable to the performance of field sobriety tests, and certainly not applicable in that situation, because they're not under arrest. It's an investigation, and the performance in the field sobriety tests are physical, and so that's why Miranda is not required in that regard.
But people, people do have an expectation of privacy. And I think something that surprised me was that police can stop you for no reason in that if they're at a roadblock. So we're all stopped. How do these things fit in with the Constitution, or even the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights? Or I mean, it's Fourth Amendment stuff. How do you?
We think it doesn't fit in well, obviously. That if you
Right.
read the plain language of the Fourth Amendment or the Declaration of Rights, where the Fourth Amendment was spawned, that it's pretty hard to imagine that that's what those folks had in mind when they wrote it. It was that the police could just stop everybody they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want, just to see if somebody might be drunk. But the courts in most of the country, 40 states, endorse roadblocks, and 10 states have either overruled them on state constitutional grounds or by statute, and they're illegal in those states. But
Something I was noticing, though, was that supposedly these roadblocks are advertised ahead of time. That's one of the requirements, at least in Massachusetts, that people be made aware that there will be roadblocks. I don't know if they have to say where they are, but that they will be. Now, if someone wanted to keep track of, all right, where are they going to have roadblocks this weekend, or with a holiday, a long weekend, or you said, was it Christmas, or when are they're more likely to
a lot around Thanksgiving, New Year's, Christmas, 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day. They've found that over the years they get more OUI arrests because obviously they're stopping more people, so they're going to get more. But you can expect them in certain areas in New Hampshire around those holidays. So.
Or whenever they get money.
Whenever they get money.
Well,
If they get funds, the funds have to be used and dedicated towards roadblocks. So it could be, we have them in the middle of July, middle of August.
I would think maybe down near the Cape, like Route 3, or...
They do.
I'm trying to think of areas that might...
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember they're looking, they're looking for data. They have this database where they're looking for OUI arrests and accidents. Well, OUI arrests and accidents usually occur around bars.
How effective do you feel roadblocks are? I mean, as a method, because I know none of us want to have people drinking and driving, and we don't want to be on the road with them. I don't want my children on the road with them, but I'm wondering if roadblocks are the most effective use of our finances in trying to deter drinking and driving.
Well, I mean, I'll premise this statement like you said. I mean, nobody's a fan of drinking and driving. I mean, there's nobody out there that can say that they encourage it. But if you look at the man hours and the money that goes into actually running these sobriety checkpoints and the numbers that they produce, it's low. There's been roadblocks where you can have I have one example here. 1,102 vehicles went through this one checkpoint. There were only 19 arrests. That's 1.7%. I mean, that's low. And think of all the people that went through it who they didn't detect.
And that's a higher number than most, too. Most of them are only 1% or so, the ones that we see.
This was a Quincy Shore Drive, so it's a high traffic area. This was both lanes. And you talk about in this particular one, they dedicated 525 man hours to this roadblock.
That one roadblock?
That one roadblock.
To get 11 people.
Those are overtime hours. They're time and a half hours.
Oh, that's all time
So
and a
you
half.
figure
Okay.
at $40 an hour, I mean, that's $21,000. If you took 5 or 6 good troopers who are active in OUIs and put them out on the road, I guarantee you'd have numbers higher than this. I guarantee you. If you threw that money at them, you'd get higher numbers. That I can assure you. But the money comes from the government, federal government. It's funded, and this is what it's geared for. So if the money's there, they're going to use it. That's for sure.
The other thing, too, is that a marginal case in a roadblock, if you ever read a roadblock plan, zero tolerance is mentioned throughout it. And zero tolerance means if you smell it, arrest them or arrest her. Anybody who's close, anybody who's got anything, any kind of odor on them at all is going to get arrested in these things. So those numbers that you see, even if it's a 1% number, some of them are going to be very, very marginal cases. These aren't the people, swerving in their lane or doing anything else wrong. These are very, very marginal. These are 07s and 06s that are smart enough to refuse to take the breath test. And these are people that may not have ever been stopped or arrested if they were just out driving.
Just to follow that point up, I mean, I have one case in particular where there's an open container and it's the passengers, but my client is driving. Well, he gets sent in the screening area. He passes all the field sobriety tests. It's in the police report. I think he messes up on one test. It's a minor error. Takes a portable breath test, blows a .07 under the legal limit. They arrest him. And someone who passes all the tests and under the legal limit, that's what Mark said. You can have a lot of gray area arrests in these statistics because of this zero tolerance. If they even have an inkling, you're going.
And if you don't generate enough numbers, you're not going to get another roadblock grant. So you have to generate numbers every
there's
year,
an
every
economic
grant. Absolutely.
incentive.
Sure.
To the roadblocks. Well, I appreciate your participation today and our effort to help inform the public about roadblocks. And thank you for watching, and I hope that in the future we'll be able to bring other programs of public benefit. This is Kendra Cooper. Thank you for watching.